Hey, everybody. Welcome to AmeriTechTalks. My name's Greg. I'm the CEO and founder of American Technology Partners. I'm really excited today because I get to have a great conversation with a very good friend of mine, Simmer Singh, who's joined us. She's the founder of Glintt Consulting. And Simmer, I'm just going to read like verbatim. Glintt Consulting is a talent development consulting practice that helps global organizations elevate leadership capability, strengthen talent pipelines, and build inclusive, high-performing cultures. How did I do? Did I get it right?
Yes, you did. Absolutely.
Oh, I'm so excited. So for those of you that don't know, I met Simmer because I've been working with teams in Ukraine. And Simmer is an expert at cross-cultural business. She made a really inspirational journey from India, where she grew up, to California, if I'm not mistaken, Sim.
Yes.
And so she has this fascinating kind of origin story and all of these experiences that gave her a very unique perspective and a unique lens on how different teams from different countries work together. So, Simmer, I couldn't be more excited. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I want to start with a few questions just to kind of get your take on a few things. So, you've lived and worked in India, as I mentioned, right? You've led global teams. You now work in the US. And I should mention that you've worked for some really great organizations. You worked for VMware, Pinterest, Vodafone. So, you have this wealth of expertise. How has your journey shaped how you understand culture at work?
Yeah, no, my journey has been, equal parts humbling and eye-opening. So I grew up in India. I had a big, I built my career working with multinationals. I'd led global teams and also worked with clients across the US and UK. And then I made the transition to the US. And I thought, that would be the professional transition would be a very easy move, but it wasn't. What I did appreciate, was what I thought was my professional behavior was deeply rooted in my values, my assumptions, and so many other things. I remember when, I joined an organization in the US, on my day one, what we did in India was, ask your boss, okay, what do you want me to do? And I did
Yeah.
the same thing. And I reached out to my boss and I said, hey, I'm very excited to be here. Tell me what needs to be done. And he was like, well, I hired you. You tell me what needs to be done.
Oh, brutal. Yeah, that must have felt very like you must have felt like, oh, did I just mess this up? Right.
Right. And that, of course, that wasn't a good start. And
No.
yeah, I mean, so many other things. I feel like, anyways, you're nervous when it's your first kind of new job. It was a different country for me. I remember, making myself a cup of coffee and a stranger walking up to me and starting talking. And of course, I'd lived in the US, so I knew small talk was a big part of the culture. But I know all of us, when we meet a stranger and have a conversation, kick ourselves in the butt and say, oh, I should have said that. And that was awkward. I shouldn't have shared that detail, and, the discomfort.
Yeah, that's right. And I know that's at the heart of what you're doing. So you're very purpose driven. And I know that a big part of your motivation with the consulting work that you're doing, helping these companies understand how to work with cross-cultural teams, is designed to eliminate that awkwardness, to eliminate that friction, right? And to make everybody feel better about what they're doing at work. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. At its core, I help organizations unlock performance that's been quietly sabotaged by cultural misunderstandings, not bad
Right.
intentions. We're all good human
Yes.
beings, and of course, we all want to do good work, but there's a lot of cultural friction. And I think you and I were talking about it, right? The world is only becoming more connected and more global.
That's
Um,
right.
I help, organizations that are multinationals or GCCs. They're called Global Capability Centers. The term is becoming very common. So I'm going to, some people know about it and some people don't. So I'm going to take a minute to explain what it is. When a
Please.
large, Western organization, American or European organization, opens up an offshore, a bank, a tech firm, or pharma company with a dedicated kind of offshore team in a different country, that's called like GCC. They used to be called like captive centers or offshore development center. The language has evolved because their role has evolved a lot more. It's no longer a cost arbitrage, which it used to be, but it's a lot more kind of harnessing the native genius of these countries, right? And it's a lot more
Right.
strategic and it's evolving. And I think organizations are running them increasingly to set up execution into leadership centers now. So I kind of help the cultural alignment, the strategy between the head office and the offshore teams.
Okay, interesting. So that was going to be my next question to kind of describe the work that you do, but what's the benefit, right? What's the value if I'm a Western organization and I've got a GCC or I'm working with employees in India, for example? What's the benefit to multinational organizations when they can work better across cultures?
So I think there's a clear benefit, right? A lot of times when we're working in the US, we operate a certain way, right? We operate from our own lens. For example, US is very egalitarian. We love everybody's voices,
Yeah.
we love hearing people out. I remember the first time that I was talking in a meeting in America, I had to really like find my way in, like how do I contribute? Because
Yeah.
everybody has ideas and it's very animated. Whereas the meetings in India were very different. People
Mm.
only contributed when they had something to say. You had to do a lot of one-on-one connects before a big meeting because relationships, were at the core of a lot of what we did. The culture is
Interesting.
more hierarchical. You look at your bosses and you don't challenge them in the open. If you have something to say, you'll say it to them one-on-one. So I
Yeah.
do feel like when you're sitting out of the US and you've always lived in this country and then you're dealing with a team, you may read things wrong. Somebody who's not
Yes.
speaking up doesn't have an opinion, whereas they do have an opinion, but there is a different way to get that opinion. So I do feel like the way this world is becoming more and more global, it's very crucial for us to understand, how we work in collective cultures vis-a-vis individualistic cultures, egalitarian, hierarchical, and all of those things that help us, operate seamlessly.
Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting. Wow. I think like a lot of Americans maybe are afraid to make assumptions about other cultures that might not be accurate or might not be correct, right? And I know I've had the benefit of traveling to Europe and working, in Ukraine, and I've been to Latin America
Sure.
extensively. But I think a lot of Americans are really cautious when it comes to like assessing some of the differences between those cultures. And I guess that's where it would really help to have someone like you come in, right, who's lived in India, has lived in the United States, has been to Europe, right, and understands the culture there, to be able to come in and really explain those things to us. I think it's really valuable. Was there a moment in your career, Sim, when you realized that being technically strong wasn't enough, but you also realized that you had to understand cultural context to get the job done?
So many moments. I'm trying to think about like something big. There was a project that I was working on in one of the organizations, and we were redoing the performance management system. There was a time point in time in the last few years where people were like, oh, bell curve is no longer the thing, you shouldn't stack rank people, and how do you give
Yeah.
feedback? And I was in charge of that project, and I spent 3 months doing a whole market analysis, benchmarking, where I mapped out all the big tech firms, what they were doing, and presented it to my boss, and we were supposed to present it to the senior leadership team in the US. And my boss was like, this is all great, but where are the conclusions? And I did have one or two slides in the end, with the
Yeah.
conclusions. And he was like, you're really burying what should be on the top. And I realized that in India, you do a lot of studies and analysis first before, coming up to conclusion, showing that you've done thoroughly researched things. Where in the US, you lead with the conclusion first,
Mm,
and
yes.
that's the time I realized that you could be the smartest person. And I thought I was so brilliant, right? Like I've done all this work and,
Right.
you could still lose the room. And that's where I think packaging things and delivering them in context to where you are is very critical. And I feel like a lot of organizations don't invest enough time. If the leadership team, I'm working with organizations currently, they've opened up an offshore center in India, their head office is here in the US, and they are sitting out of Europe. So you can understand how much help they need to bring a new project that they're launching together to help each other understand each other's perspectives more.
Right, right. That's right. Yeah, it's so interesting to me. I'm going to ask you, and I think this would be to the benefit of some of our listeners. What typically turns those cross-cultural differences that you mentioned into frustration or points of conflict within the business, even when people have the best intentions? What are some of the typical frustrations or friction points that you see?
I think it's the attribution error. When someone doesn't, behave in the way we expect them to, we don't think that, oh, like, this is a cultural difference. We think it's a character
Right,
flaw, right? The
right.
person who doesn't speak up in meetings isn't somebody who's lived in a hierarchical culture all their lives,
Yeah,
um, it's is passive. Maybe he's not that interested in the meeting or doesn't have anything to say, or the person who jumps to conclusion and interrupts isn't adapting to a low context communication style. They're arrogant, right? So I feel
yes.
like we explain away behavior that puzzles us by imputing the intent or personality. And once we've made the attribution, we stop being curious. And that's where someone like me comes in and helps you understand, a
Mhm.
different perspective. And I think it becomes all the more interesting when you look at how the GCC landscape is evolving, right? If we want them to be strategic, then we need to map out that plan, the year one strategy, year two strategy. What does that look like? What do you want them to do differently? And create that camaraderie, from the beginning. Otherwise, culture will just take its shape, right? And it'll be different for different people. And that's where the friction will come in.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, how do you, Sim, when you're consulting with business leaders, how do you help them move away from doing things their way or my way versus your way to a way of working that truly serves the team as a whole? How do you do that?
I think the first thing is to reframe the conversation entirely, right? I get leaders to stop asking what's right? And start asking what does effective look like in this situation, right? And a lot
Mhm.
of times we're so focused on our opinion, or what we're trying to do, that we don't look at what the problem is and what will get me the solution. So I think leaders are very comfortable with, their own way of working, their own assumptions, that they stop getting curious. And that's where, I would come in and explain to them or have them focus on what is their goal here, what are they trying to get out of the other team, and how do they then figure out why are they not getting the results that they want to get.
Yeah.
um, yeah, yeah.
So you work closely with GCCs. You mentioned them earlier, these global capability centers within multinational organizations. What cultural challenges are you seeing most right now in terms of the GCCs? I'm really curious.
I think the most pressing challenge that I'm seeing is the leadership gap that emerges in GCs as the GCCs evolve, right? Most of the GCCs were, at least in the last few years, set up as execution centers, very smart, technically
Right.
talented teams,
Mhm.
and they've done brilliantly on that business model. But I think more and more the teams, the head office don't want these teams to just execute what they're saying, right? They want them to share
Right.
opinions, they want them to challenge what the head office is trying to do, or contribute in a more partnership kind of way. And that's where this requires a different cultural shift, right? Where there's proactive communication, there's comfort with ambiguity, and willingness to challenge some of the assumptions.
Yeah.
So, this requires a little bit more than just talent or technical expertise, that hasn't been, I think, looked into so far.
Yeah. Right. So I love asking everyone this question, and I'm going to ask you as well because I'm really interested to hear about how the future outlook is for the business that you're doing. I would imagine since COVID, right? We've been doing a lot more business globally. We talked about having this global economy. Maybe I'm using a team to do my website that's in Eastern Europe. Maybe I'm using an IT team in India, right? What do you think the future outlook is with the proliferation of AI and all these things that are happening in the market right now? Do you think that we're going to have a greater need in the future for a better understanding of how we function together cross culturally?
Absolutely, Greg. I mean, you and I both have learned post pandemic. Like, first thing we've learned is like work can be done from anywhere, right? And I mean,
Yes.
that's why you're sitting, in your house and I'm sitting in mine,
Yes.
and we're both having this amazing conversation. So of course, I think the world isn't getting less connected, it is getting more connected. People are
Mhm.
also realizing that the talent is dispersed everywhere, right? And you don't want to be located, or be tapping into a certain geography. And I think the more we tap into the talent and native genius of different cultures, different countries, and bring that to the table, the more there's need for these leaders to be ready. We need a pipeline of leaders, who are not only just order takers but strategic thinkers. And that's where someone like me kind of comes into the play to help organizations understand. And I feel like most strategic organizations are already investing in these kind of things, because they're realizing that we're at a big inflection point, and
Yes.
it's time to invest now, and it's just not
Yes.
the right thing to do. I think it's a smart business bet.
Yes. I 100% agree with you. All right, Simmer, this has been a really fascinating conversation, and we're going to wrap it up shortly. But I wanted to ask you before we kind of close it, if I'm a business executive and I'm sitting in an office in the US and I have a team in Eastern Europe or Latin America or India that I'm working with, can you engage with me consultatively to help me understand how to best work with my team and avoid issues from coming up and maximizing the performance? Is that one of the things that you do with your customers?
Yes, absolutely. And the first step for me would be to understand the landscape, to understand, where are you in your journey of evolution. And with that, I'll start with the diagnosis of, where you are. And diagnosis is just first part of the puzzle, right? And then we
Yeah.
create, a strategy, and it could be an assessment, followed by strategic alignment kind of charter with workshops, coaching, and it really depends. So I think the good part about working with somebody like me is that, I'll go into the details and create a plan that's truly suited to the organization, and
Yeah.
cater to, where you are in your journey.
Yeah. Now let's say that I'm an early stage founder and I'm looking at doing business globally, or maybe I'm thinking about leveraging some IT talent, right, in India or Eastern Europe. But I don't have a huge corporate budget for a training program or whatever. Can you do coaching, like one-on-one coaching, if you had a CEO that wanted to learn more about best practices when it comes to cross-cultural teams?
Yes, absolutely. I could do one-on-one coaching. I could also just do an audit and give you a report. I have a partner that's sitting out of Asia who does, partner with me, and they have very detailed assessment. We're also trying to build a tool with the help of AI that'll do the analysis of, your hierarchical structures, team chats, all of that, and give you a
Yeah.
detailed report of where you should focus. So yes,
Yeah.
that's absolutely possible.
All right, last one. I'm just giving you like lightning round. I'm a chief people officer, large enterprise. I don't have a cultural person that's developing cross-cultural training for my organization, but I'd like to have a training program put together. Could you help me put a training program together for my employees that are in a brick and mortar office in India somewhere?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm just talking to a team, it's a pharmaceutical company, and they have an office in Hyderabad, and we're designing a training program, catering to some of the issues that they were facing. And I
Yeah,
have so much research, there's Hofstede, there's Erin Myers, there's Andy Belinsky. So we could dig into all those researches together and design a tailor-made program, for the team. And it can be delivered virtually, or we could tap into my team in India and deliver in person. So all of that good stuff is possible, and that's what makes me tick.
oh, that's amazing. Simmer, thank you so much for joining me for the conversation today. Listen, if people want to go to hear more of your thoughts when it comes to cross-cultural business, or if they'd like to go sign up to work with you, where can they do those things? Can you give us a few ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. My name is Simmer N as in Nancy Singh. You can find me on LinkedIn. My
Yeah.
website is called Glintt with a double T, glintconsulting.com. And we'll share, hopefully we can share links, Greg.
Yeah, we'll
I've
drop
also
some links.
Okay, great. I've also started writing a newsletter, so we'll put in a link for people to subscribe to the newsletter. And I'm always up for coffee chats, and I offer 15 to 20 minutes free complimentary discussions. So if anybody's
Yeah.
up for coffee, and I'm always curious to learn more, so I'm absolutely open to that idea as well.
All right, surprise sucker punch question. What's your favorite coffee drink?
What's my favorite coffee? I just love my cappuccinos. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
I don't have
Nice.
a fancy machine, but I use what I have, and I think that's like I do at least 3 cups of coffee a day.
Oh, yeah, same. You have to. Well, Sim, thank you so much again for joining me. This was really, really interesting. And I hope that you guys got a lot out of this conversation too, especially if you're thinking about doing business with teams in other countries. Sim is one of the foremost experts that I've met, and she can do a lot to help you understand those complexities and those nuances. Sim, thank you again so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Greg. This was so fun. Thanks so much
All
for
right.
having me.
Ciao for now.